Anyway, I'm here, as I understand it, my charge is to talk to you all about the future of the American Humanist Association. Now that's an interesting charge because I'm all of 5 weeks into leading the American Humanist Association, which of course is it's an 82-year-old organization. I don't know if anyone's ever bought an 80-year-old house. But if you buy an 80-year-old house, it takes a lot more than 5 weeks to peel back all the wallpaper and pry up all the floorboards and see just what exactly is underneath those beautiful bones. Um, so there are a lot of things that we know, and I'm happy to share sort of what the knowns are about the future direction of the AHA. But the truth is, I think in my role as an organizational leader, folks like me do well not when we act as the sort of oracle on the hill, passing down the answers, but when we act as symphony conductors and sort of pull from each part of the chorus a good melody and find a way to synthesize them together. So part of why I've wanted to hit the road so early, and yeah, I was in Sacramento yesterday, and I go tomorrow to Los Angeles, and then I go to New York and Boston and Memphis and so forth. The goal is to meet with as many of our local group members as possible and our donors, just as I've done with staff, and hear from everyone. What is the AHA at its best? What have you admired about what we've done over the past 80 years? What has disappointed or frustrated you, whether recently or forever? And what are your aspirations for what we can build this movement into? Because when the original crew of 30 some humanists came together and wrote that original humanist manifesto back in 1933 in Chicago, the aims were broad, right? The idea of, they talked about humanism in terms of joy and promoting a good life, that humanism ought to guide us towards a life well lived. Well, that can mean a hell of a lot of things. There are a hell of a lot of paths to get to that destination. That humanism ought to advance, social good for the many, not just the few, and to increase freedom and flourishing for people. Well, again, you could apply that mission to any number, hundreds of organizations, right? And of course, part of humanism is that we don't have a belief in the supernatural, but then, that's also true of Freedom from Religion Foundation, yet we are not a copy of Freedom from Religion Foundation, much as they do incredible work. So all this to say, you know, the charge of humanism in the present day is pretty broad. And so I hope to spend a lot of time hearing from you all about what you have liked that you've seen and what we would like to see from the AHA. But I'm going to talk about some of the things I know to be true. That sound good?
Certainly. Let me
Um,
start with you mentioned a couple other organizations. I think that they're in a row. That there's the atheists,
mhm,
and I guess I'd put them in the middle. And then there's the freedom from religion people, and they are, they kind of a point of view, right?
mhm.
The atheists are just saying, okay, atheist. The freedom from religion are saying the religion, and then there's the humanists, which is like atheists, I think, but instead of just saying, nothing, they're saying something, right? They're
Right.
saying this is what
This is what I believe.
right,
Atheism is what I don't believe.
something like that.
Well, no, and I think it's a really interesting way of mapping the space, right? If the way I think about it, when I think about the main secular groups, Americans United, their purpose, I think, is to bring together folks both not of faith and of faith, specifically to, ensure the separation of church and state. Freedom from Religion Foundation plays an important role. Calling them a gadfly sounds like you're diminishing them, but I think they play a really important role calling out the excesses of religion wherever it exists and pushing back against them.
Is that started by that woman, Madeline O'Hare?
I think that was American Atheist.
That was the
And American Atheist, I think, plays an important role building community recognition and security for those who are atheists, who do not believe in God. Center for Inquiry, I think, plays an important role advancing a rationalist scientific perspective, and ensuring that our scientific community does not sort of become infected by religious biases. And then, as you said, Scott, I think the American Humanist Association provides a positive view of what non-religious people can believe, provides people who think like us with something to belong to, believe in, and fight for. And, my sense is that before I talk about what the AHA is looking at doing, I want to talk about a number of trends that I think we're seeing right now at this moment in America. When we think about sort of the state of non-belief in America, we see the number of people who are disaffiliating from religion as greater than ever. It's gone, from about 5 years ago, it's gone from about 23% to 28%. So that's pretty rapid growth in 5 years. And interestingly, while my generation, the under 35s, are still the least religious demographic group, the growth has actually been fastest among the 35 to 50 age group. So that's, we think of this as something that's just concentrated among the youngest people, but again, the rate of growth is happening among the elder millennials, young Gen Xers.
I might observe that's the age when people have kids.
That's interesting. Nothing like trying to wrestle a screaming 2-year-old into a car seat to make you believe there's no God. Nobody's coming to help me.
Having kids kind of forces you to be honest about things that you may have played around with before.
I think so. And frankly, you get into the point of explaining these questions to kids and you start to realize where the contradictions might fall. Kids are really good at asking you questions. I make that joke about the toddler in the car seat. I started my career as a preschool teacher. I trained at the Yale Child Study Center to teach 4 and 5-year-olds. So it's said with all love. And I actually think part of what the AHA needs to do is do more for parents and kids to help build help folks who want to educate their kids within a humanist ethic build that out. But we've got the growth in non-believers. But we've also, thank you so much. We've also got this growth in the number of people who believe our sort of core precept that it is possible to be good without the belief in a God. So that's when we assumed that the good without a God slogan about 20 years ago, that was meant to be subversive. It was meant to be a deeply controversial position. At the time, you get a lot of pushback. Well, how can you be good if you don't believe in a God? And you still hear that, but actually the most recent Pew survey on the issue in 2023 shows that, fully 2/3 of Americans believe that it is possible to be a good person without having any kind of religious belief at all. So there are now, we now constitute those of us who believe you do not need a belief in a deity to be a good person. We now constitute a moral majority, which is an interesting position and one that came across because of lots of work by people like Roy Speckhart, right, and Dan Barker and Annie Laurie Gaylor and the folks at American Atheists. I mean, we had to fight to get to that place, but sometimes I think we can see all of the Project 2025 Christian nationalism news and feel like we're in a defensive crouch when the truth is the reason we're talking all the damn time about this stuff is because it's unpopular in a way it was not unpopular 20 years ago. This set of policy prescriptions from the Heritage Foundation is what the Heritage Foundation has been doing since the 1980s. It's the same shit warmed over. But now you get to the point where when you explain the nuts and bolts of Project 2025 to people, 80% of people who hear about it hate its guts. That's why we're hearing about it more. And so we got to this point where not only do we have 2/3 of folks who say, hey, you can be good without a belief in a God, but we've got a consistent majority, sort of a floor of about 84% of people who say separation of church and state is important. Supreme Court shouldn't be legislating their own religious beliefs from the bench. We've got to, America is not a country where we should have religious laws. And that's consistent across Pew polling, AP polling. You've got that about 80% threshold of people who say, yes, I support the separation of church and state. I might, be concerned by what I see as the erosion of my religious culture, but I don't believe that we should be a theocracy. And that's, that we know that this is true because the religious right has to cheat and lie to get what they want, right? They have to take advantage of undemocratic systems. They have to lie and say that their positions are pro-child and pro-family, which, by the way, as the son of two parents who needed in vitro fertilization to conceive, there's nothing to me that betrays their hypocrisy more than the fact that they've telegraphed after abortion rights what they're coming after is IVF, the technology that helps parents have wanted children without which I would not be alive. So
You've heard of that book called Born a Crime?
By Trevor Noah?
Right.
Yeah. I guess I would be born a crime in Alabama. And so, it it makes more clearer than ever, you can sort of see through their mendacity and realize it's not about protecting children, it's about enforcing Christian sexual ethics. And not just Christian sexual ethics, but hardcore religious Christian sexual ethics on an entire country. And most people are very clear that they don't want the government in their bedroom. I think the other interesting thing that we've got to look at with religiosity and the trends is that a lot of people will say they believe in God, and their belief in quote unquote God looks nothing like the God of the Bible, right? You've got a lot of, you've got sort of the spiritual but not religious crowd for whom God really refers to a sense of mystery or a sense that there is something to the universe not yet known, or that there might be. I would say there are a lot of people who call themselves God believers who you might compare to the sort of the deists of colonial times. And I think that, in the same way that deists like Jefferson, professed a belief in the God, but were fighters for humanist perspectives, I think that there is, frankly, a lot of common cause to be built with folks who are nominal believers in that sense, but don't believe in an activist God that intervenes in our lives or judges people. So that's the trend line we're seeing around numb. That's number one. The second interesting trend line that we're seeing is around isolation, right? We now have 40% of young people experiencing what we might refer to as extreme social isolation, right? Having very few relationships outside of their family. We've gone from 41% of under 35 saying they have three or more, they have fewer than three close friends, to 53% of people under 35 saying they have three or fewer close friends. We are, as people are disaffiliating, not just from religion, but from community structures more and more, we've become more isolated. And with that, we've seen incredible spikes in anxiety and depression. We are, the Vivek Murthy has called it a loneliness crisis and a mental health crisis. And you can name a lot of, there are some people who believe that technology contributes a good deal to that. There are some people who believe, there are some people who believe red dye 40 contributes to that. But I think it's pretty inviolable that our level of social interaction with other people has a direct benefit on our mental health, as does having some kind of value system that we believe in, right? Having a sort of moral core gives you a sense of purpose and agency in a way that not having clearly articulated principles kind of robs you of. And so we're seeing a lot more young people disaffiliate from religion, and yet find themselves in a position where they're lacking some of the social benefits of being part of a community and the benefits to your mental health and confidence of having a really strong basis for what you believe. And that's contributing to this sort of tinderbox we find ourselves in, where you've now got more into this void. We're seeing the entry of a specific type of huckster, characterized, I think, by like Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, right? These people who come after, especially but not exclusively, young men. And frankly, a lot of them make their way in through the sort of skeptical and non-religious community. They start with lifestyle prescriptions, but they sort of move into this quasi-political theology that says, hey, the way to feel like you have power and purpose in life is to hate other people, is to figure out who you're superior to and try and believe in that superiority and enforce that superiority. And so you've got, in this world where more and more people feel dispossessed, not only because they feel more isolated, but because, the house in San Lorenzo my grandparents bought for $15,000 on a mechanic and a school lunch lady salary is now 900,000 freaking dollars. And how does a young person growing up in the Bay Area feel like they can afford a home unless they have the skill and will and ability to be a project manager at Google? You've got people who are crying out for meaning and purpose and connection. And you've got folks who I think are deeply opposed to the ideals of humanism who are offering it to them. But I think we have the opportunity, if we can figure out how to create relevance make humanism engaging for it to be the antidote to dispossession, for humanism actually to be the way that people find meaning, purpose, and community. Uh-oh. Oh no, is it trying to shut us down? Just as I'm getting to the good part.
Is that on the computer?
Maybe because it goes still. Well, yeah, it's not on your computer.
I don't think so.
So that's the macro trend we're looking at in terms of sort of the social milieu, right? In terms of you know, people's sense of isolation, especially the younger generation, what they're looking for and want. Please go ahead, because I'm about to now switch gears to the Supreme Court. So
Critical thinking too, because the reason people can be sucked in by all these hucksters is there's no critical thinking that's being taught.
well, and I would argue that there was no critical thinking ever really being taught. However, we did not have the scale of misinformation that we now have.
We give every moron a megaphone.
We do. And, I mean, right here in Silicon Valley, we've created these bullshit amplification platforms that literally all the financial incentives are around posting, sharing, and consuming content that heightens your emotion. And we know that actually, emotionally heightened content is sort of the enemy of rational content that provokes you to really understand the issues. Not that that's a little too extreme, because obviously you can have great emotion about things and understand them rationally. But I mean, we see the kind of stuff that's on Facebook. The truth is, lies about what FEMA isn't doing in North Carolina gin people up and get a lot more play than an actual sober analysis of how AIDS being distributed.
The media and a lot of things in general kind of feed on people's fears. And what I've noticed from the few Christians I've spoken to, maybe the one, is that he doesn't trust human nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I can see where that would lead to the idea that if you're going to live in a peaceful society, you better have the rules written down so everyone knows what to do when.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's what's interesting to me. I think that if you wanted to sum up the core conflict, I think you could do it like this. The religious right believes that humans are mostly rational, but also not good. That they're responsive to carrots and sticks, but they need strict rules to keep them in line because they're corrupted by original sin. I think humanists tend to believe because, there's the joke about two Jews, three opinions. And I think for humanists, it's two humanists, 4.5 opinions, and an epistemological debate about the nature of opinion. But I think humanists generally believe that humans are mostly good, but not always rational. And people tend to be altruistic, but sometimes need a little bit of help to think critically and understand what might be in their and the group's best interest. And so it is this, I don't want to call it a holy war, but there is this big conflict, and you can sort of see the ways in which these consequences play out in public policy, right? If you assume that people are mostly rational but not good, then we can't, we need very strict limits on welfare systems because people are always trying to cheat, right? Or if people are mostly good but not mostly rational, well, we need a lot more education about things like vaccines and why they're good. And we're not trying to brainwash people. We're trying to lead people towards a behavior that is ultimately going to help them. And we recognize that people's thinking might get in their own way. Anyway, all this to say, I think this is a good segue into talking about sort of the policy environment we're in, because that is, that conflict, I think, plays out at a lot of levels. The Supreme Court is a total wasteland for us at this point. We used to be able to litigate a lot of good establishment clause cases from our legal center that we can simply no longer do because the Republicans packed the courts to the extent where, my God, Donald Trump could appoint somebody Supreme Bishop of the United States and demand that people file in a line into the White House where he sells indulgences, and the Supreme Court would say it's okay. Like, that's maybe a bit extreme, but we really have appointed justices who tend to agree with the Christian nationalist perspective. And frankly, a lot of the discussion that I'm having with folks is we're worried about bringing establishment clause cases because we're worried that could lead to the Supreme Court and district courts setting worse precedent. And also, we're just, I mean, I think most folks know my dad was the first open atheist in Congress. And he was very clear that he didn't, before he passed away, he didn't think that Congress had done a whole hell of a lot of significance since Gingrich got there in 1994. They'd pass one, omnibus bill every few years, No Child Left Behind, the Affordable Care Act. But there's not a heck of a lot of legislating actually being done on Capitol Hill as opposed to speechifying and attaching riders to the budget. So that's the legislative and political environment we're operating in, where really we see the religious right pressing their advantage in states and in school boards, where we have not built the infrastructure to respond to them in the way that they have built it up over the years. And we've got a court system that, again, because of conservative capture of the courts, is really deeply biased against our perspective. Now, I think all of those macro trends sort of lead us to some pretty clear conclusions about what the American Humanist Association has got to do in this moment. But I want to pause and see if anybody disagrees with those or sort of has anything to add about where we are right now as a country.
Ron Blake, can I call on you? We went around and introduced ourselves, and I just wanted to give you one more chance, if you can hear me. Okay.
Well, there for a while.
Maybe one day the prodigal Ron will return.
Yeah, I'm not sure where all this fits in. What I have noticed, in this organization anyway, what's happened is we've gone from what this is called a humanist community, right? It's supposed to be a community. Right. And instead, what we have is people who come and say, please entertain me or I'll go somewhere else. That's what's happening. I don't know whether that's the isolation part or whatever it is, but the participation, forget it. Then that eventually comes, I'm the treasurer of this group, right? That means I'm not going to give you a damn cent, right? So that's another problem we're having with the financial, Anyway, I just wondered if you'd speak to that sort of thing. Is that really, you think, the isolation? I don't know. I think it really has to do with, when I got my MBA, I did a lot of studying in marketing. What they knew then, and to the point now where they know about psychology to such a deep degree that they can really work people's minds. I mean, they're really, really good at it. It's not like it was when I was growing up anyway, in the 40s and 50s. It's nothing like that.
Nope.
They know which shelf, what color, which shelf the food should be on. If they can do that, they can do a whole lot of not so good things.
Well, exactly. I think what I'm hearing you say is two things. One is, actually three things. One is that people are more demanding and less patient with group structures and institutions. People are less likely to affiliate and more likely to disaffiliate when they don't feel there's an agreement. There's I think, higher expectations of psychological safety. I think the second is that people are looking to be, people just don't have attention spans anymore. Short form content has ruined us. Short form content has ruined my generation in terms of the ability to actually engage in something long term. Now, there are ways we can fight that as a macro trend. I also believe in accepting the world as it is and swimming with the current to a degree. And I think the third thing is there actually has been a lot of good research about what it takes to keep and hold people's attention. The problem is it's in the hands of the war profiteers. And those are the facts as they are. However, we could make use of what we do know and what we can learn about how people make decisions and respond to things to, present a research-driven vision of humanism that is more attractive to, and not just young people, but to anyone searching for meaning and sharing our core values. But Chris, you had a point.
You were touching on some things that I was planning to get into, and specifically the what's called the NONES, NONES, which should be a very rich demographic to feed into humanist groups. And yet we see here, with yourself accepted, a rather older crowd. I have two daughters, aged 27 and 30. They have been zero interest either in their mother's Judaism or my ethical culture and And I think part of it is, lifestyle, don't really have time. And what Carl was alluding to, I think I've termed the meetup mentality. People need to become involved in groups and really become part of a community, and we're seeing less of that. And it goes beyond the religious and or humanist or atheist groups.
Right.
I'm also heavily involved in the camera club community of the Bay Area, and it is also an older demographic. We can't seem to get younger members, and I think some of it is points to some of the same problems with younger people getting involved in these things.
I think it's a good point to make, Chris, that these problems are not unique to us. And to a degree, that means that the solutions that people are finding that do work can likely be applied to us as well.
I think the pandemic and the isolation coming from that really hurt badly.
I would agree with that. I think it hurt group organizing. I think it hurt kids in general. I mean, all the folks I know in education. Before the AHA, I was working at a tech startup that built mental health apps for children in elementary school age. And the truth is, even before the pandemic, it was accelerating, but post-pandemic, the levels of anxiety and depression again were skyrocketing, especially among children. And one of the things that we know from the research on psychology, and not just young people but everyone, is that a big part of feeling okay is having the sense of locus of control and agency, right? That I am in charge of my own body and the decisions I make can positively impact me, and having a core value system, because the best way that we can build confidence and a sense of purpose is through self-integrity, acting in line with our values. Can't act in line with values if those aren't identified. You don't have them. So I think that COVID sort of accelerated this trend to where now we've got sort of this reckoning where people realize, I mean, the one kind of book sales that are up are self-help book sales. I think there's a recognition from people that there needs to be some kind of renewal. People aren't looking for a religious renewal. So the question is, can humanism provide that kind of renewal? And to do that, we're going to have to be a lot savvier than we've been in the past about how to reach people. But the good news is we don't have to do all the research ourselves. What else do folks think? Because folks on screen, folks here, about the macro trends.
I'm old, and I can remember the first TV set in the neighborhood. That before TV came along, the only entertainment you had was other people. And that was an important part of life. Starting with radio, TV, people found more and more reasons to stay home and not go out, and were still satisfied with what was happening. And that's kind of intensified. And
and you went from having people.
What you have is the need for entertainment competing with the need for fellowship and other people.
Agreed. And I think part of it is, I mean,
I don't see an easy way to reverse that, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, frankly, part of it is how do we make this shit more entertaining? Right? Like, let's be real. We think about the four horsemen of the 2000s, right? Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris. I mean, Sam Harris, I would argue, is the most successful, was the most sort of continues to have the most enduring audience because he figured out how to harness new technology, how to deliver people sort of pithy insights in ways that they could apply to their lives. But other folks, say what you will about Hitchens and Dawkins, they were not afraid to put on a show, to cause a little bit of a ruckus and get some people. Now, I think you can go too far over that line, and certainly the AHA has criticized instances where they have gone too far over that line.
Sam's thumbnail is Christopher Hitchens.
Oh, so it is. But I think part of it is and I've got maybe this is self-serving because I've got a background in stand-up comedy experience as a working comedian. But part of what we need to do, I think, is figure out how to use new media technology to deliver a message around humanism that is something people, rather than trying to make people want to pay attention, you got to make things people want to pay attention to. And then I think part of it is building fellowship in ways. So just to give up the ghost on one thing that we're going to be doing, we're going to be launching a digital community on, has anyone heard of the app Discord?
Yeah.
Discord. Yeah. Okay. So folks know of Discord. We were trying to do something on Mighty Networks, which nobody had ever heard of and no one ever uses. And I said, we're not, first rule, I think, of getting people to adopt new user behavior is don't make it a new user behavior. Build it somewhere that build your platform somewhere people already go. So we are going to be trying to find ways to create fellowship in ways that are, more concordant with how people are already showing us that they're building community, which is not, we're going to continue resourcing local groups. In fact, we just, in the last few weeks, we just launched our largest local group grant program ever. So we're going to continue supporting people who want to meet in person like this. But my hope is that by creating an online community, people will flow into that community and then out towards the in-person communities once they've built that identification with humanism, rather than having the in-person community be their entry point, where, if you don't get along with those particular folks, you might be turned off of humanism, as opposed to if you can see the full breadth of humanism, you might identify with the parts of it that you like, and then you might be incentivized to try the local community and have more of a reason to stay. So that's getting us a little bit into the tactical territory, but I want to bring it back to any other folks have observations of where we are in this moment. I love I think that might be Stuart. I love Stuart's. What is that? Is that Tahoe?
Stuart Y.
Stuart Y.
Welcome, Stuart Y.
Hey, Stuart Y.
I'm sorry. Hello.
Hey.
Sorry I was late. That is Lake Maline near west of Calgary.
Okay. Well, it's gorgeous. So, I can share a little bit about sort of some of the decisions we've made or are considering about the AHA's programming going forward. And the thing I'll say is, you're not going to see an AHA that is sort of radically different in terms of its sort of core beliefs or philosophy of humanism, right? We're going to, humanism evolves over time, obviously. We've got 3 different iterations of the Humanist Manifesto, but the core tenets remain generally the same. That, if we guide ourselves by empathy and reason, and if we say, hey, we believe in that people have inherent worth and dignity, that the highest good, the highest calling is to increase human freedom and flourishing, and that we believe that there's nothing about the universe that we cannot learn and uncover through the scientific method and through rational thinking, and that can be our guide. And when you marry that with empathy, you can come up with reasonable approaches to pretty much any issue. Those things are going to be the core. And in fact, I'd like us to be doing a lot more of talking about those things, because I think sometimes I don't mean this as a criticism of the AHA specifically, but where movements that are trying to move people to action, I think often get things wrong of late, is they present their positions as self-evident, right? They say, well, you ought to believe this about the Supreme Court or racial justice in America, or, whatever we're talking about. You ought to believe this because it's right. And as true as that may be, a lot of the time, I think ultimately you are able to build a more enduring connection with people when you have a set of first principles that you tie everything back to, right? So, it's not that we need to be standing up for LGBTQ rights because, and don't you dare ask a question about it, we need to be standing up for LGBTQ rights because a core part of humanism is the belief in self-determination of all people. That you cannot tell me how I define myself, who I love, or what my identity is. I decide that for myself. And I'm not going to be put in a box by someone based on their religious views. That tenet ought to then, defending that belief in self-determination ought to drive our support of the LGBTQ community from the religiously driven attacks on their very existence. So that's, we want to, I think, be rooting a lot more of of the, in the old chestnuts and, in Dewey and in Vonnegut and in Joyce Carol Oates and all those folks. And we're still going to have a legal center, and we're still going to have an education center, and we're still going to have people working on policy. So I don't want people to think that, the future of the AHA is not going to be some radical transformation that people are going to find unrecognized. I want to lay that on the table. I'm curious, before I share a little bit more, what folks are maybe coming into this discussion about the future of the AHA hoping that I would say. Now I'll figure out how disappointed you're going to be. Or thrilled,
May I ask, related to what you were talking about, it's really not, again, I don't know if it's specific to the AHA, but you were talking about, standing up for people's rights and self-determination.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with the Star Trek phrase, the Prime Directive?
I am not, unfortunately. I'm more of a Star Wars guy, but have at it.
Okay, I believe, to summarize it, if I could, or paraphrase it, when the original Star Trek would meet another civilization, their Federation Prime Directive was one of non-interference and non-applying their own human values on the values of the civilization that they meet. So, kind of like I think there's kind of like a ugly American kind of a tendency to apply our American values on other countries, societies, and cultures. But and another way to look at this also is how our society, our American society, says that there's a law that says you must wear a seatbelt and you must drive at this, speed limit, because we don't want you to kill yourself and we don't want you to be a danger to other people. But the seatbelts and the motorcycle helmets, that's really just to protect yourself. So I guess I'm asking you, how do you or the AHA draw the line between overreach and basic human rights and values?
Yeah, it's a good question. If we are, you know, how do you, what I'm hearing is this question of, okay, you've got respect for self-determination on one hand, and then you've got sort of aggressive libertarianism on the other hand, and sort of how do you find a balance between, and this I think is the question, to be fair, that humanists have asked for a long time. How do you find a balance between human liberty and interdependence? Right, because the other reason that you should wear a motorcycle helmet is that actually it's not particularly good for society if somebody ends up with their brains splattered all over the road. That's not just a consequence for that person.
It's a shortage of organs.
Okay, so maybe you would argue it is good. I think here's where I think, because what I also don't think we want is for the AHA to be an organization that takes a position on every single narrow political issue. Right. I think there are places where we've taken positions, right, as an organization. There have been for decades. But I think that if we're going to build a sustaining movement, we've got to build a movement that has room for disagreement on issues like motorcycle helmet laws, if not on issues like, say, gay marriage. So I think that to me, the line is, we can debate about whether the state has a compelling human interest in regulating such and such, right? We can entertain different positions, and we might say, that we can agree to disagree on those things, and we may tilt one way or the other as a community. We may even tilt to the extent where we say, well, we think that, the child tax credit is good and we should, because it helps families raise healthy kids. And as humanists, we should support that. What I think we want to be really firmly against is the idea that people can legislate morality, that we want to be against laws that have a basis in religious doctrine, where especially where we're trying to, the religious right has this weird obsession with controlling people's sexual ethics and family structure. And I think we can be really strong in saying, oh, actually, I don't know if free love is in fashion anymore. But actually, people have the right to constitute their families, constitute their social lives and their love lives in the way they want. But that's not just part of self-determination. To me, that's arguably one of the most important parts of self-determination, because that's one of the most intimate parts of our lives. And we're not going to want to tolerate any interference there. Stuart, I think you're hearing me kind of live work through what has been a core dilemma of humanists for a long time. So I don't pretend to have all the answers. Certainly not the right answer to this one, but that's kind of how I approach thinking about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. I mean, again, we're also, I mean, I'm probably mostly, you're focused domestically within our country. But again, to mention, go back to what I was, some of the things I mentioned earlier, we do have Americans saying that, in other countries, they should not have child marriage, or they should not allow women to be mutilated. Just because that's their culture, and other forms of bullying people, right?
Mhm. Well, and to an extent, I think I personally, and I've got to think about, the line between this and no, but I think I think it's pretty consistent with the humanist ethic and what the AHA and humanists have said over the years to subscribe to, basic principles of universal human rights, right? Like, I think it would be fair to say the AHA is against genital mutilation wherever it occurs. And that saying that is not necessarily a colonialist imposition of our view on other cultures, but just sort of a statement of universal human, I don't know, thou shalt not cut off the clitoris. Um, but I do think one of the things that I think is really important is that, yeah, we're the American Humanist Association. We're not going to be taking a whole hell of a lot of positions on, what's happening in Pakistan or Turkmenistan. We're going to, continue building a strong culture for humanism here, but that we have the opportunity with our relationships within the federal government to make sure that American foreign policy is still helping respect and protect a culture of free thought around the world. So as a specific example, we had, I don't know if folks know this, the office of the Nepali Humanist Organization a couple months ago in Kathmandu was ransacked by a mob of ultra right wing religious Hindus, and the gentleman who runs the organization fled to America and is trying to get his wife and daughter safely out on a visa so that they can apply for asylum. And we are working with the members of Congress that we've sort of cultivated the support of through the Free Thought Equality PAC and the Congressional Free Thought Caucus to help them get their visas and get extracted safely. So, yeah, we're not going to go full bore into working on international issues, because I don't necessarily think that's why we have this Nepali organization, so that they can kind of set the agenda for what supporting humanism in Nepal looks like. But I think one of the cornerstones of the AHA relative to other secular organizations is that we've cultivated really strong relationships with members of Congress, and we can leverage those when it's appropriate to do things to support that culture of free thought abroad. The last thing I'll say, Stuart, is that now I understand the prime directive, and I like that as a metaphor for fighting against what I would call sort of the cultural totalitarianism of the religious right. So I'm gonna invoke that a little bit when I'm with audiences I think might know Star Trek. Yeah,
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for your input and your opinions. Thank you.
totally.
But I think internationally there are big efforts to basically screw uh, non-religious people or people that don't believe what you believe. You got the Ayatollahs in Iran that killed, all of the other people that weren't their particular brand of Islam. And I don't like the idea of them having an A bomb, atomic weapons. And you've got, Lebanon, you've got that taken over by Hezbollah, which is in its very name a religious party. And if you're in Gaza and you try to, if you're a queer for uh, Hamas, they'll throw you off a building.
Well,
They do
Poland
that.
should talk about the conflict in it. My partner is a secular Jew who works in Israel-Palestinian peace building.
Uh-huh.
She was a political reporter in Florida, and she decided she was tired of getting called part of the deep state when she tried to report on town hall meetings. So she decided she'd go somewhere a little less contentious, and she went to Israel to work on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Um, and so, but we cannot. I mean, we're here. This is the anniversary of October 7th, a completely brutal event, and one that is preceded then a whole wave of brutality. And I think there are a lot of opinions, and should be a lot of opinions in the humanist community about how to resolve the conflict. I think the one thing we got to be clear on is the scale of the brutality is inseparable from the extreme religious fanaticism of both Hamas and the right-wing Netanyahu government. Because the right-wing Netanyahu government is filled with ultra-Orthodox religious freaks who see leveling Gaza as their holy obligation. And that's why we've seen, I think, a lot more violence than is strictly necessary to contain the threat to Israel, which is a legitimate threat. And of course, Hamas and Hezbollah have their own fanaticism that's leading to the brutality as well.
I'm enjoying this conversation. I just want to let you know we have to leave here at 7:30.
Okay, got it.
And it takes us about at least 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes to get the stuff torn down. So just want to let you know.
Thank you. So why don't I do this? Because I'm noticing that gives us probably 15 more minutes to talk. Why don't I spend about 5 minutes talking about what I think the AHA is going to do sort of in 2025, and then we can do 10 minutes of questions. I've loved this back and forth, and I mostly want to hear more from you, but I also want you guys to hear something substantive from me, not just what I think about the trends we all agree are happening. So here's what I think you can expect to see from the AHA in 2025. I like to plan, this is my my experience in the tech startup world. I like to plan in sprints. So right now we're in a sprint between now and the election. We've been working on this campaign called Democracy Not Theocracy, which we launched 3 weeks after I started. We're sending thousands of postcards written by humanists to Pennsylvania to make people aware of Project 2025, because about 50% of people don't know about Project 2025, but when they know about it, they hate it. They hate the theocratic vision for our country, and it inspires them to get out and vote. So we got the postcards going out. We're hiring kids on college campuses, Spelman College in Georgia, University of North Carolina, Greensboro, University of Pittsburgh, and Arizona State University, 4 key swing state campuses to raise awareness of Project 2025 among college kids. And we're issuing our largest local group grant ever. So giving out $15,000 to different AHA affiliated local groups from around the country. It's open to affiliates, not just chapters, for the first time, for folks who want to engage in any kind of promotional work to stop Project 2025. And we're doing a big informational campaign to our 800,000 followers on social media, giving people sort of explainers about Project 2025. And those have gotten already, about 200,000 impressions from folks sharing them and starting conversations with friends and family. In addition to that, we've been helping the Congressional Free Thought Caucus. Jared Huffman, the only open atheist in Congress, is leading that, leading the Free Thought Caucus, and in turn leading the messaging for House Democrats around Project 2025. We've been helping them with that messaging, providing issue briefs that have shown up in floor speeches and articles about this threat. So that's what we're doing through the election, and that's also buying me time to go around and have these conversations about what people want to see next. What that's going to look like, our legal center. We currently have a legal center that doesn't have any lawyers, so we're going to fix that. The legal center is going to focus a lot less on establishment clause constitutional claims that, frankly, we can't win until the Supreme Court is reconstituted, and focus instead very clearly on discrimination against non-believers in hiring, employment, and education, for a couple reasons. One is that even though it is safe for all of us as folks in Palo Alto, or me as someone living in Annapolis, to be openly non-theist, people living in rural America live in a completely different America when it comes to being there's a great researcher at University of Nebraska-Lincoln named Dina Abbott who chronicles that, non-theistic folks in rural areas face a very real fear of violence especially that they will be fired from their jobs or that they'll be denied health care, which is almost always provided by religious institutions, the more rural you get. And we do still, suing about a cross in the public park has never really endeared us to people, frankly. Let's be honest. We come off as whiny and petulant when we pick fights that we understand are about respecting the separation of church and state, but most people see as cosmetic. But most Americans believe nobody should be fired from their job because of their religious beliefs, as long as it doesn't prevent you from doing your job. Most people believe you shouldn't be denied renting an apartment because you don't have the same religious beliefs as the landlord. And the Civil Rights Act of 1965 generally protects people from that kind of discrimination, although there are holes in the Civil Rights Act. Civil Rights Act actually allows religious discrimination. There's a loophole for employers that have 15 or fewer employees. And for a lot of businesses, and that's a lot of businesses in rural America, family farms, the small restaurants, the small mechanic shops, through a really good impact litigation strategy, we could not only help restore people who have been discriminated against in life-altering ways, make them whole, win them life-changing judgments. We could also litigate in ways that advance legislation that closes those gaps and protects religious freedom, not just for us, but for all people. And that's a sustainable strategy because when those kinds of employment discrimination cases are easy to win, so we get our attorney fees back. But also it's sort of a winning messaging strategy where we can say, hey, we're protecting the American value of freedom of religion by standing.
Are you getting adequate press coverage for these?
Well, that's part of what we have to figure out. That's another piece of it is that, but we have to be doing things in the first place that are setting us up to get good press when they happen. Right. We're basically running every legal, I've told the team, we're running every legal and policy initiative through a 4-point test. Can we win? Can we win the argument? So does this affiliate us with sort of a moral majority position? Is it visible? Are people actually going to pay attention to what we're doing? And is it addressing some serious material harm rather than being cosmetic? Now, it has to satisfy 3 of those 4 points because you might imagine there are some things where we've got to do them because even though it's not going to get any attention, it's still the right thing to do. Or sometimes we'll have to take a position where we're in the minority, but it's going to get us a lot of attention and it's the right thing and so forth. But we're going to be a lot more discerning about the kinds of issues we take on with an eye towards not just what is going to help people feel like, okay, these humanists, they're fighting for things that I believe in. And that makes me want to be a part of it. Brings me to the policy work. So I don't think anyone in this room, I don't think anyone I've talked to believes that a 3-person policy shop is moving the needle on Supreme Court reform because it's not. So we're going to be extricating ourselves from a lot of these sort of federal issues that we've been working on for a while and doing genuinely good work, but work that is just in an environment that is not allowing us to go anywhere. And we're going to be refocusing a lot of our resources towards fighting the far right when they're trying to press their advantage in state and local governments, especially in school boards. And a lot of what that's going to mean is training AHA members to be citizen advocates, the folks who want to, training people to write letters, give testimony. We could send 700 letters to Congressperson so-and-so about a bill that's moving through Congress. And, that I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter at all, but that, we also can't pretend that's a huge needle mover. If we send 700 letters to the, something county, the Boone County, Kentucky school district saying, hey, you can't have a Christian prayer on the first day of school, that's the sort of thing that might actually achieve some kind of impact because we can mobilize people at the scale needed to overwhelm the system. Or we could go before the state legislature in Arizona and testify on a bill that is, in that vote, that chamber, everything is being decided by one vote. So we go in and make a case for something that's on the razor's edge. And, it's not like we're going to get testimony before Congress a whole lot anytime soon, but we could do that. And again, we could film it and we could put it out and say, here's what humanists are doing. We're fighting to make sure women's reproductive health care is protected or climate science is protected because there's the new movement is trying to ban any kind of mention of climate science. So we're going to be reorienting our policy department a little bit in that way. We're not ending all of our federal work because we still coordinate the Congressional Free Thought Caucus, and that is growing. It went from, I think, 3 members when Roy Speckhart started it with Jared Huffman and Jamie Raskin and Jerry McNerney in Jared Huffman's apartment. We're now at 20. We just grew to, or we added our 24th member right before I started. So we're going to continue working with the CFC, but we're going to reorient a lot to that. Our education center is where I think we're going to see the most dramatic changes. I don't know if any of you guys go to our webinars.
I haven't gone to any, but I've seen a lot about them.
Well, that's part of the problem, right? If you guys are pretty tapped in, our webinars aren't attracting a big audience. So sometimes it's easy to work within clear heuristics. So I've told the team no more webinars in 2025. We're just not doing anymore because you get 15 people and half of them are asleep. That tells me we need to be redirecting our effort to something else, specifically providing more materials for humanist parents. Because, we have to think about, people don't join organizations unless they fill some kind of significant need for them, right? There are a lot of organizations that I think do a good job. I don't give them my money. I don't give them my time unless they are really providing something. They're doing some advocacy work. They're doing something that is really resonant with me. There are more and more parents who are trying to help their kids figure out how to be good and moral people without the benefit of a traditional religious structure to help them along. We're going to be producing more. We're actually already in the midst of producing more content for parents and more content for people everywhere to help figure out what does it mean to live a humanist life and how does that bring you to fulfillment. So rather than sort of discussing broad philosophical perspectives, which, let's be honest, we look at the enrollment in philosophy majors in universities, the market for discussing broad philosophical perspectives. Well, I think we ought to provide space for the local groups who want to do that. That's not bringing people in wholesale to our movement. However, saying, here's how you apply humanism to your daily life in order to have more meaning, stability, and purpose. Basically, it's a reverse of the formula that Jordan Peterson has used to attract a lot of people to his sort of conservative religious philosophy of life. So we're going to be doing a lot more of that with short form content, short videos.
What you need. They got to be shorter. Because when I looked at one of the reasons why I didn't take these courses is because they go on for 2 hours or something.
Yeah, no.
And I have to reserve 4 half hours might work.
Oh yeah, I think what we need to do is text people a 2-minute video every day for a month. That's the kind of, and this is, when I was working in the ed tech industry, we're seeing sometimes I think it's good to see what the venture capitalists are funding. And what we're seeing in the ed tech world is a massive trend towards microlearning, short form content that is more targeted, and the delivery mechanism is generally trying to get you in a daily habit of doing something really briefly. So we're going to be launching something like that in the new year around the 10 commitments framework, which I think is one of the cleverest things the AHA has put out in the last few years. And we're also going to be, we're going to continue to do online events, but they're going to be geared more towards bringing people together for, trying to create moments of inspiration and empowerment rather than people sitting around talking about what they already know. And then the final thing we're going to be doing is building more community. So I really believe that the local groups are the heart of the AHA. That's why we launched our biggest chapter grant. We're going to be investing in more staff capacity to help people who want to organize local groups or transition their local groups to somebody else, get training, mentorship, and support. And just to be out on the road more, recruiting people. And then we're going to marry that with building the online community that I talked about earlier, because again, I think having that online presence is important. Final thing we're going to do is we're going to make some hires and invest a lot in the communications function of our work. We used to have a podcast that disappeared for reasons I can't identify. Half the world listens to podcasts now, and we have a lot of brilliant folks in our community who would like to talk. I'm going to be out on the road speaking a lot more, college campuses, Unitarian churches, talking about an affirmative philosophy of humanism and what it means to folks right now. we're going to do what I call the Pete Buttigieg strategy. Show up everywhere, talk to everyone, try, and seriously, Pete Buttigieg was the unknown mayor of South Bend when he first ran for the presidential nomination. He fixed the problem by going literally everywhere that would have him and talking in an articulate and engaging way about the vision for America he was trying to sell. And we're going to try and attempt to do the same thing. Like it too. Well, we'll give it a shot. So that's a little bit of, I took way more time than I said I would. But that's a little preview of things. Now, I know we're going to go out and grab some dinner and discuss this more. So I want to turn to the folks on screen maybe and see if they have any questions first, because you guys can ask me when we're at the restaurant.
Hi, Ray. Nice to see you. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Ray. Hey, Elisa.
Oh, you probably need to.
Oh.
So
Hi, Elisa.
Do folks on screen have any questions that they want to ask before we adjourn?
How long do you think you'll be at the library? How long do you think you'll be at the library? And then what time could I meet you at the restaurant?
Oh, well, I think we're about to go to the restaurant in about 10 minutes, Ray. So I hope hope you got your car nearby.
Yeah, I'm about 25 minutes from the restaurant, I think. So I'll probably meet you there.
Does your car have a performance pack?
All right. Well, Ray, I'll see you there. Anyone who's not going to join us have any questions that they want to ask? And by the way, I'll say too, anyone can email me fstark@americanhumanist.org. I like getting mail.
Ray's on his way.
A quick question with regarding the materials you talk about putting together. In the past, I had discovered, this was many years ago, my little boy who I bought materials to read to is now 31, so it's a while ago. But it was books from the FFRF, I guess, Freedom from Religion Foundation. Basically, bedtime reading books for kids on being skeptical, things like that.
I was paging through some of those books at Free Thought Day yesterday. I think they're good. I think they're a little dated. But I think we could be doing content like that for kids. And this is, I've worked in I worked in children's media in the past. I've got a little bit of designs on figuring out how you do sort of a humanist children's book series. I think, and to know that that's something that you found useful for your little ones, Stuart, I think could be a good space for us to get in over time.
Excellent. Yeah. I mean, because you've got the reality of what the religious institutions have provided for individuals and society in the past, whether it be matchmaking, dating, helping people who are destitute. And I think that if we can replace all of that with the humanist teachings and principles, that'd be great.
Agreed. The last thing I'll say, because I know we have to start to pack up, and I hope folks will email me, ask me questions, that this is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of feedback, because I'm going to make some mistakes along the way, and we're going to need you guys to help us calibrate when you see something that doesn't make sense. It's going to take a lot of volunteer effort to organize these groups and participate in the legislative actions, and it's going to take money. You guys are going to get AHA annual appeals over the next few months, and we're certainly not entitled to anything. But if you like what you hear, give what you can, because at the end of the day, the AHA has been able to do what it's done because we hire good people and we pay them decent salaries. And it's not cheap to hire good people and pay them decent salaries. And we're talking about hiring a few more of them to do this kind of communications and policy work we want to do. So, when you get down to brass tacks, that is going to become very important if we want to realize our aspirations. So as these appeals hit your mailbox, your inbox, I want you to know it personally means a lot to me, whatever you can do to support.